All right, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Most Important Game podcast. I'm Paul Monahan, and my mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best. I help my clients to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more. Well, it's a big day in the Cleveland, Ohio area. As we're recording today, it's opening day. And so we thought we'd bring somebody from the Cleveland Guardians baseball organization to spend some time with us. And it's early in the morning, and our guest, we got to get him out of here. He's got a stretch. I think he might be on the mound today. Not sure. But anyway, super glad to have Jay Hennessey with us. Jay, let me tell you a little bit about Jay, and then we're going to dive into some really fun discussion around the inside game, what I call the most important game. So if you don't know Jay spent 25 years in the U.S. Navy in their elite teams environments, also known as the U.S. Navy SEALs. And after numerous deployments, multiple commands, Jay retired from the Navy, joined the Cleveland Guardians baseball organization as their learning and heading up their learning and development efforts. So Jay has told me that his dream is to pitch for the Guardians someday, and so he's hoping that they empty the bullpen today so he can pitch on opening day. So anyway, Jay, great to have you. Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Hey, did you see that Will Ferrell pitched for the LA Dodgers? Did you see that video from a couple of weeks ago? Or maybe it was more recent than that.
I've seen one. I thought it was a couple of years ago. So maybe he did it again.
Maybe it was.
He was at spring training this year. I was at a game against the Dodgers and he was down there. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, and the whole shtick, and yeah, maybe the internet is recycling, the video on that one, but I just thought that was hilarious where he's like, I don't know, he throws one or two pitches, that was it. And then he gets relieved and he's like all upset about it. And
yeah, I think I've seen the same one. I don't know when it was from though, but yeah.
Yeah, super brilliant. So, yeah, huge day here in Cleveland. We have not for the listeners at home, it's opening day in Cleveland. It's going to be like a beautiful afternoon, which doesn't always. Usually, we have snow in April for opening day in Cleveland.
Yeah.
But I think the other cool thing is that it's a giant eclipse day. It's the big eclipse. So, Jay, what are you doing for the eclipse?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like millions of people have come to Cleveland, and everybody's worried about like traffic and where's it going to be. So, I think we're going to catch the eclipse from the front yard and then scoot on down to the ballpark right after that.
Love it. That's great. That's great. Well, Jay, thanks for carving out some time to do this. Really appreciate the chance to talk about this. These mental game or inside game concepts, as I've kind of teed it up to you, the premise of what I talk about. And by the way, I do have to do this before we jump in here. So let me go to the iPhone camera. This moment brought to you by the most important game. Play better, struggle less, enjoy more. And actually, Jay Hennessey is an endorser of the book. So I have to publicly thank Jay for that. Jay, appreciate that. Jay, you made the inside jacket cover, by the way. So that's pretty impressive.
I just updated my resume with that.
Yeah, right. I think I would too. In fact, should we go to the quote? I think that would be good if we did that. Let's go to the quote here. All right, so we're going to flash this up on the screen. For those of you at home, here's what Jay had to say about Paul's new book, The Most Important Game. Paul has a unique ability to connect the dots and help us learn from the most surprising people and experiences. His reflections help us navigate through golf's mental game dynamics and, more importantly, the challenges that are a part of everyday living. All right, here's the good part, Jay. Ready? He shares his wisdom in the same way he shows up for everything. Genuine, authentic, and with a smile. Oh, man. Well, it's too late to take that back, Jay. Even if you wanted to. Anyway,
it's only because you said I couldn't use the word jackass in my quote. So that's how we ended up with what we had.
Yeah, I would have been okay with it, but the editors had an issue. Like it wasn't me, just so you know.
Got it.
All right, so let's dive into this here. Let's talk about so Jay, a career in the U.S. Navy SEALs. Tell me about, like, all right, how did you find your way to the Navy? What's that story?
Yeah, I don't have an interesting story. I feel like I
Ah, come
stumbled
on.
into the Navy. Truth is, I grew up in a blue collar town in Connecticut. My dad was a pipe fitter, and our guidance counselor, in retrospect, I don't know this to be true, but our guidance counselor, I think, had this affinity for getting people into the service academies. And I think she kind of connected the dots for me. It was like, okay, his father's a pipe fitter. Like, how can we get this guy a free education? So she was hitting me up early on the Naval Academy. And, but then when I kind of learned about service academies and what that was like, I was like, I'm not sure that experience is for me. So then she's like, okay, well, don't write it off. There's also this thing called ROTC. And, I didn't really know much about the Navy, but I was intrigued by this idea of a free education. And so she encouraged me to apply. And, one thing led to another. I was accepted with an ROTC scholarship, and I applied to several schools that had the ROTC program. That put me at Villanova University. And 4 years later, you select where you're hoping to go. And SEALs was intriguing. It seemed like a fit. And 25 years later, I jumped out.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Well, so all right, but you were a swimmer also, right?
Yeah, I think that was probably part of it. She knew I ran cross country, I swam and did track. So she thought, like, the athletes and the military, that was kind of her thing. And previous guys who were on the swim team, she actually got to go to the Naval Academy. So I think that was part of the connection there. Sure.
Yeah. Did you swim at Villanova?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Why not?
I wasn't that good, Paul. It was good for high school.
No, I don't know. Like, seriously, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I had actually hoped to run in at Villanova, and I went out for cross country. And at some point, maybe 4 or 5 weeks in, the coach pulled me aside. He's like, I don't know who you are. You keep showing up, but just so you know, you're never going to run for Villanova. So I decided that was a sign that I should move on to something else.
Yeah. Subtle. That was subtle.
So, very
But you
subtle.
got it.
Yeah.
You're great at nuance. I think yeah. That's awesome.
That's a true story. He did say that almost verbatim.
That is tremendous. It's like, I think back about some of the things I did when I was younger, because I just had no clue. I had no idea that people were telling me what they were telling me.
Yeah,
And they
that's
had to
probably
go
how I
into
was. Like, the fact that he never said my name for 4 weeks, I wasn't picking up the signals. So on the 5th week, he's like, all right, bud.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. So, all right. So you finish ROTC. Like, what's the process like? You have to decide where you're going to go. Like, what, how did you get to, why Navy SEALs? What was that decision like?
Yeah, so let's just remember, I mean, we're going back 32 years here. So anything I say is revisionist history of how I want it to come out.
Of course.
As I
You get to write the
recall,
story, Jay. Yeah.
yeah, as I recall, somewhere in your beginning of your senior year, you had to put in your dream sheet for your top 3 choices. And I put in special warfare, I put in intelligence, I think, and I think surface warfare. And at the time, the special warfare SEAL teams, I think they gave out 12 spots to people who did ROTC and 12 to the Naval Academy. So it was pretty competitive. So I got super lucky. It was really based on your fitness scores and then I think your grades. And that was it. Yeah.
So, all right. So you show up and you're like, at what point did you say to yourself, oh man, I'm not sure if I'm in over my head here, or, right? Because you hear all these, as civilians who don't get to experience that or don't experience it, really at all. What was that? What was the early part of that like? And then how did you, Yeah, I'm interested in kind of the mental game too, by the way, of how
Yeah.
you move through that challenge.
Well, it's interesting, so we're talking 1992. The internet was not a thing. There wasn't a whole lot to read or to look up on SEAL training. Part of the ROTC program, my junior year, I did a 3-week program called Mini Buds, where you went out there and got harassed for 3 weeks. So you got a taste of it. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. But it did feel like, you put the application in and then you get accepted and then you're like, oh my gosh, like, what did I do? And I remember people asking me, what are you going to do in the Navy? And then this very awkward, like, well, I'm going to SEAL training. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out. You didn't want to say, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL, because then you feel like you were jinxing yourself. So I think right from the get-go, when I was accepted, it was a little bit of like, oh boy, how's this going to go? And then next thing you know, you're at the front door, walking across the quarterdeck. And for me, when I showed up, you show up in your service dress blues and your orders, and they tell you there's this process how you're supposed to check in. And when I checked in, there was an instructor by the name of Instructor Joe Valderrama, who was a character, to say the least. You could do a whole episode on Joe Valderrama. And he saw me, and he came. The quarterdeck is like the front door, right? It's like you come across, there's a couple guys in uniform, and Instructor Valderrama saw me, and he came in and put his arm around me, and he's like, hey, Ensign, welcome to Buds. Let me escort you up to the main office here. And we went walking across the grinder, which is where the main part of SEAL training takes place. And I'm in my service dress blues, and he's in his green shorts and blue instructor shirt with his arm around me. He's like, you can call me Uncle Joe. And right then I had a taste of, I'm like, okay, I think I know what naval special warfare is going to be. And this is going to be a rough spot. So that was fun.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Uncle Joel, right?
Joe Valderrama.
Oh, Joe Valderrama. That's fantastic. So, all right. So you get into this, and now you're in for the duration. And I always love, so it's BUDS, right? Basic Underwater Development.
Demolition SEAL Training.
Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. Okay, gotcha. Such a great name. So you get into BUDS and you're moving through these weeks. Like, what was that like? Like, how do you survive something like that?
Well, you're 21 years old and you don't know a lot, right? So you don't know any better. And you've told people that you're in SEAL training. So it's like, you're kind of like feeling that pressure in the back of your mind, like, oh my gosh, people know I'm here. I got to make it through. But I think, at the time, you don't really know. You're just doing what you're doing. But I think if you, in retrospect, again, a bit of revisionist history, I think there's a couple things that probably help you navigate that. One, as an officer, I think there was 5 officers in our class, and one was from Singapore. You're kind of, it's kind of Lord of the Flies. You're looked up to a little bit as like you're leading the class. So you feel a little bit like you got to take care of others, which when you're worried about other people, then I think you worry less about yourself. So that's probably a big one. And for everyone in the class, you always have a swim buddy. So I think everybody who was successful was trying to help their swim buddy versus help themselves. And that, I think that's a huge key. And the second one, which I didn't know at the time, I never heard of self-efficacy or this idea of like controlling your outcomes. But BUDS is a series of incremental, increasingly difficult challenges over, at the time, I think it was 26 weeks. And it starts, really basic. I mean, like I remember one of the first tests is underwater knot time. So you go down and maybe it's 9 feet of water or 12 feet of water, and you have to tie a knot. The instructor checks it and gives you the okay, and then you signal to come up, and you come up, and he's like, okay, next knot. And you go another breath, go back down, and you do that for 5 different knots. And at the end of it, you're like, wow, I passed. That was cool. And again, it wasn't terribly difficult. But in my mind, I was like, I followed they gave instruction. I followed the instruction and I passed. And there's some guys that didn't. And then the next test, the 50-meter underwater
Right.
swim, which I had never done, and followed the instruction and I passed. And this continues on every week. There's these new tests. So I think you end up telling yourself this story, like a coping mechanism of, when I pay attention to what they tell me to do and then I execute it, there's a good outcome. And you know that you feel nervous before you do it, but you follow the instruction and you have a good outcome. So I think it becomes this pattern of like, I can control my outcome. And I think when you string that along through a series of increasingly difficult tests, you end up, the people who are successful, I think, end up with this like model for themselves of like, I can do hard things. I follow my process. Yeah, it feels nervous, but I can achieve the outcome.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. And I know that this idea comes up in a few different places. And initially, I'm thinking like a James Clear in Atomic Habits, where it's, hey, take what's the next smallest step you can take toward your development. I'm thinking like, my friend Todd Graves at Graves Golf Academy, who's been, instructing, and teaching students on the single plane swing for the last 20, 25 years. And, he talks in terms of, progressive development. Let's start with the putter. And can we move the ball, 6 feet in a straight line? And then we move up to, eventually we move up to the driver and we gain confidence along the way. So I'm thinking that it sounds a little bit like that, only a lot harder.
Well, I think it is the same thing. And,
The
the stories
process is the same.
you tell yourself.
Yeah. What's the best advice you got as a young Navy SEAL?
I'm laughing. I'm just thinking SEALs are never short on advice. So there was a lot of it.
It's got to be PG-13 though, Jay. It can't be, at least PG-13.
There is one right before I think it was the Sunday before Hell Week, which, starts on Sunday evening and you're basically up and doing things until Friday afternoon. And I think he was a retired SEAL, came in. I don't remember his name other than he came in the class and he opened his remarks by drawing a line across the entire whiteboard. And we're all sitting in class and he's like, does anybody know what the line is? And we're like, no, nobody knows what the line is. He goes, the line represents your life. And this is when you were born and this is when you're going to leave Earth. And then he put a tick, about a third of the way through. He's like, does anybody know what that tick is? And we're like, no. He's like, that's Hell Week. He's like, it's a tick in the entire length of your life. It's going to seem like forever, but it's just a tick. So how many people think that they can get over that little tick? And, I don't know what he said after that, but it hit me. It was like, interesting. Like that's just a small moment in time. And then somewhere else in that same speech, he said something around the idea of like Friday afternoon is going to come for everybody. Like you can't stop the clock is what he said. So Friday is going to happen. You just have to decide where you want to be. Do you want to be standing on the beach next to the people around you? Or do you want to be in the barracks after a hot shower? But you can't stop the clock. And those two things throughout my career, you have a tough spot and you're like, this is just a ticking time and you can't stop the clock. Time's going to keep moving. I just got to decide where I want to be.
No, that's great. Yeah, that is great advice, obviously. And it's great perspective. I often talk about the faster we can get to perspective and context especially within a moment that is full of struggle, the better we are able to move through it. So love that. That's awesome. so you get through SEAL training, and take an assignment, and now you start your job as a SEAL, right? I'm really interested, because I've heard you talk a little bit about this. I'm really interested in your take on, leading and being a teammate. These two concepts inside an environment like that, and what you learned about what it takes to lead others well, like maybe who your models might have been, and then but also the other side of that is how do you, how can you be a great teammate? So kind of put a lot on there, but curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about the SEAL teams that was powerful for me was there's just incredible people, like everywhere you looked. It wasn't like you think of the one or two people that you looked up to. I mean, I could tell you in every single platoon I was in, every single assault squadron I was in, every command, there were people at every level that were just incredible. And not just SEALs, people that were our direct support people, like, that ran the communications department or ran intelligence. And I think if I had to put a pin on the thing, it was that everybody was trying to do their best to support the team, to support the platoon, to support the mission. Selfless devotion to others and to the mission. And when you get down to like key individuals, there was, an executive officer I had that just modeled this, of just like how he led and how he was, morning physical training at the SEAL team. A lot of guys would try to get out of it, but like the executive officer who certainly could have had other stuff to do, would always be out there, and that, just a mental model of like, no matter how busy he is, he's out there, right? And then there were junior guys that just like, whenever like the platoon chief would ask, hey, looking for a volunteer, there was a handful of guys who were always like, yeah, I don't know what the job is, but I volunteer. And it made me realize that it was really this idea of being a great teammate. Too often I think people think about what does it take to be a great leader, and if they just think about what does it mean to be a great teammate, how can I help others on my team, everything, the score kind of takes care of itself after that. Now I'm not sure I did it all that well, but that's definitely the model in my mind. And I can think of certain individuals like that are top of mind that I'm like, yeah, he was the epitome of that.
Yeah, I love that. What does it take? Like, what are some of the qualities that you remember specifically, or even behaviors that the best leaders that you encountered? Like, what would they do? How would they think? What would they say and do?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a SEAL team. So there definitely was a part of, people being tough, physically fit, being a kind of a badass, and I remember usually it would be like the old guys. Like we had a prior enlisted commanding officer, Bill Cheatham. And I remember him coming, I don't know how old he was at the time. He's probably younger than I am now, but at the time he seemed like an old guy, right? He was ancient, and he's still out there, doing PT with us young 20-year-olds. And you're like, man, that's badass. So there was that component of people, regardless of age, regardless of whatever, still able to get after it and do their part. Like age was an excuse. But maybe even bigger than that were the people that just connected. And, the military, it's a little bit wonky because you got different ranks and, different, whether you're a SEAL or an intel or an airman. But there were some people that just made connections with everybody. And, they were just the person that when you saw them, you enjoyed talking to them. You enjoyed speaking with them. And they didn't get hung up on whether they were senior to you or junior to you. It was, hey, we're teammates. And so I think my mental model for that was like, especially as an officer, like don't let rank get in the way of building relationships with people, because they really matter.
I love that. Yeah, connection. That's huge. What causes leaders or teammates to be in struggle?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's like universally some things that can take people down a dark road. Um, alcohol, financial problems, infidelity. I mean, I think there's a group of that stuff that just plagues people on the planet. Um,
Mhm.
but I think, you know, um, I guess that's part of it. But it seems like people that had their act together professionally, um, they had their entire act together. They had their home life in order. You know, I joke and say, most of the best teammates I've worked with, like if you went for a ride in their car, the inside of their car would be immaculate, right? There's not like empty McDonald's bags in the back seat, because every part of their life was just like structured and ordered. The SEAL teams, you've got a cage where you keep your gear, and I think of a teammate that I served with, who died in a training accident, Tom Valentine, and his cage was like immaculate. Everything had its place. And if you asked Tommy V for like something, he'd be like, yeah. And he'd like open up a drawer and there would be the thing. Um, so I think the the best teammates, like they keep their life in order for like all of it. And the ones who struggle, yeah, it starts to, there's a fringe, there's an aspect and it starts to unravel and then it just impacts. It's probably a long answer, but anyway, that's
No,
as I think about it.
yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking of, make your bed. That's in the vernacular today, right?
Sure.
I think somebody that said that. Make your bed, clean your room. That's another one that's kind of being kicked around today. So a mentor of mine once said to me, "How you do anything is how you do everything." Now, some of my colleagues have challenged me on that one because I'll say that, and they'll be like, "Well, I don't know. I'm okay with my car being messy. I don't need to spend time on that, but my work is tight. I don't know. So
Yeah, I don't
which
think
is
it's,
fine.
we're all humans. It's not
Yeah,
prescriptive. And I'm
right,
certainly
right.
probably just highlighting the people that I recall as being like, man, if I was picking a team, he'd be on it. And here's kind of what I observed. I'm sure there's great teammates out there who've got empty McDonald's wrappers in their car. Um, anyway,
No, it's of course, yeah, but I think those are great. Um, what if you think of lessons learned for you, and I want to talk a little bit about how stress and pressure shows up in an environment like Navy SEALs and missions and so forth. And I'm sure stress and pressure was something that came up a lot for you and your teammates. Um, what are some lessons learned that you remember in some of your experiences where um, either pressure showed up, a really really stressful situation, showed up and you performed really well, or in another scenario it came up and you didn't perform the way you would have liked, and so there was a lesson there. Curious to kind of kick that around a little bit.
yeah, I think the SEAL team, it's an interesting environment. I guess anywhere in the military is because you really do have a range of experiences where there's, the proverbial, you're saving your own life, you're jumping out of an airplane. And there's things that are not real risk, whether it's public speaking or briefing a senior officer. So I think over time, my mental model was like to break down what is the pressure? Is this like a no shit, like risky thing? Or is this just briefing a senior officer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
which one are you solving for? And usually it added perspective, like, okay, I'm just briefing a senior, like, what's the worst that can happen? So for the real risk, you're like, okay, I've been, back to the self-efficacy stuff. I've been trained to jump out of airplanes. We've got all this protective gear. It's got a reserve. So, you end up with this kind of self-talk, I think, that is that helps you get perspective in either case. So one, I think if I had to say the two things, it would be having perspective on what's the real challenge or what's the real risk. And the second one is understand that self-talk is actually a thing. It's a thing, and you should learn how to kind of weaponize it for good. I think you and I both read the book Chatter by Ethan Kross.
Ethan Kross, yeah.
And boy, I wish that's a piece of advice. I wish if I was a younger guy, I'd want to read that before I started SEAL training.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know who else talks about an inner dialogue, if I'm remembering this correctly, is your friend Gio Valiente in the golf mental game space.
Yep.
Right. This idea of how important it is to pay attention to your inner dialogue and have one that's productive and supportive.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. What place does jackassery or tomfoolery play or have in a performance environment?
Yeah, I think great teams have this almost an irreverence, right? Like able to go places that seem almost disrespectful. Nobody is too senior from getting teased for whatever they did, and nobody takes themselves too seriously that they can't have self-deprecating humor if they screwed up, because I think it does a couple of things. When you smile, when you laugh, like, it's just better. I'm sure there's science behind it, and it has kind of a neutralizing effect. I was telling my twin boys, maybe this was last year, they were asking me about SEAL training. And I remember one time in Hell Week, we're in this it's called a demo pit. You're just in like mud up to your waist, and we're eating a box lunch, but you're covered head to toe in mud and stuff.
Wait, you're having lunch in the mud?
Yeah, it's completely disgusting.
Sounds awesome.
You can imagine sitting there for hours, like what else is in the mud? And I'm taking a bite of my sandwich. The guy next to me was like, "Hey, you got something just right there." Now, we're covered head to toe in mud, and he's telling me I got something on my nose. And it was stupid. In retrospect, I don't even know why it was funny, but it lightened it where you just start laughing. And, then the instructors, if you start laughing, they're like, "Hey, Hennessey, what are you laughing about? I'll give you something to laugh about." Right. And that makes it funnier. And then, they're slinging mud at you, and your food's getting all dirty, but it was almost like, you had a victory over the instructors. And so anyway, long story short, I think great teams have this irreverence, tomfoolery, jackassery, whatever you want to call it, that makes it funny, even when times are a bit rough.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And I'm thinking, Jay, about my visit to Coronado a few years ago with our friend Bob Schultz, and one of the things that struck me as we're on the at NSW and on the base, and the one of the classes who was there for their Hell Week, I presume, they were coming back from having lunch, and they were all sort of like shuffle running. And I'm like, "Bob, what's going on over there?" And some of them had maybe some of their lunch with, I think they had their lunch with them. They all had a bag, and they were like coming back to the building from somewhere. I don't even know where. Right. And he's like, "Yeah, they're coming back from lunch." And I'm like, "Well, why are they?" He's like, "Yeah, you can't walk anywhere. You have to be running." But it was like this tiny little baby fake running thing. It's like it was so funny, like anything to survive that week. Right.
Yep. The Bud Shuffle.
The Buzz Shuffle. That's awesome. So, all right. So a few years ago, you get an opportunity it's time to leave the Navy, right? And so you get an opportunity to come to Cleveland. What's it been like to join an organization like the Cleveland Guardians?
Oh boy, that's one. It's amazing. The short answer, but there's a lot to unpack there. The Guardians is a special place. Um, just from ownership all the way down. Um, it's an organization that has the ability to look a bit longer term than most organizations do. Um, so I really think that's part of the reason why they invested in learning and development. Like how they have the decision space to think, beyond the season or beyond the playoffs, and think about how can we get upstream of supporting the athlete, and how can we support our coaches, how can we support our staff, how can we support our scouts, and everybody's development. So it's a special place, yeah, for sure.
That's great. What's been the I wouldn't say maybe challenge. What's been the as you have transitioned from a life in the military to a life in the civilian world, back in the civilian world? What's been the biggest notable change or challenge, or what's different about that?
Well, one is like in the military, you would call it the civilian world. Now that I'm out, it's not called the civilian world. It's just called the world. So learning the nuances of language has probably been a big one. I don't know. I think, my role, I work with another guy, Josh Gibson, who grew up in the football world. So the two of us are kind of these non-baseball guys supporting people in baseball. And we're not in charge of anybody. So I think for me in the Navy, as an officer, I was always like in charge of something. And now learning to navigate, really, if people, there's nothing we do that is like compliance based. Nobody has to sit in our workshops or has to do development. So the only way we are able to have impact is if, the proverbial customer sees value in what we're providing. So it's a little bit different than the military, where there's a bit more structure and hierarchy, and people do things because it's like, okay, I guess I got to go to this thing. So it's been fun to navigate that. It's I like it.
That's great. I know that reading is a big part of how you approach, I'll say broadly, performance, but all of the topics that you spend your time, all of the waters you spend your time swimming in. How did you find reading, and then also what should we know about reading that you have found to be so impactful?
Well, I think I spent probably 2/3 of my career wishing I was a reader and always finding an excuse not to read. Either just being a young guy and, doing other things, or starting a family, having 4 kids. And there was always a reason why I didn't read. So I think the majority of my career, I probably read maybe like 2 books a year, which is crazy. And
lots of pictures, probably.
A lot of picture books, a lot of magazines. In 2012, I left development group and went to a training command to be the commanding officer of the schoolhouse Buds. And I remember just telling myself, this is the year. I have no excuses. I'm on shore duty. I'm going to become a reader. And I did. I was voracious that year. I read a ton. And I felt like every book I picked up, it was just like, wow, I can't believe I've been missing all this. And so I think the next year I decided I was going to read a book a week, which was actually not a good goal. I did it, but it had a wonky outcome, right? Because I started, selecting. I'm like, well, it's a 400 pager. That's going to be tough to read in a week. So I quickly
100 pages better. Yeah,
that's right. I quickly disposed of the goal. of how many books. And it was just, hey, I want to read impactful books. So yeah, I think it is a one of the, if not the most, one of the most productive habits or routines that I have is reading, whether it's memoirs, fiction, or the proverbial how-to books. I think, I was just talking with our good friend Luke Carlin the other day, and we were having a beer and talking about what is it about reading that is so impactful. And we were thinking about it. And we were thinking specifically of a memoir. We're like, someone has spent 50 years on the planet and learned all this stuff. And then they've taken time to curate it down to this piece of content that as a reader, I could consume in, call it 12 hours. So they've taken, just pulling out thin air, 50 years of experience, and condensed it for me. If I want to invest 12 hours, I could gain all that insight. And when you think about it that way, you're like, gosh, what a gift, what an opportunity. So yeah, I'm a reader.
That's great. Love that. Al, you've inspired a lot of us to lean into that as well, which is really cool. What if any book would you write if you were to write a book?
Yeah, I think the mental model I just said about taking 50 years and curating the lessons into something for an audience is probably what I'm thinking about with my 4 children. Like, I should really, and I've started a little bit about how do I capture some of these lessons to give to my kids. So when Emma went to her kickoff and Navy ROTC 2 years ago, I wrote her, I'd call it more of a pamphlet. It's probably 25 pages or so that had stories really focused on being a midshipman. So that would probably be it.
It was like a free ebook for your daughter.
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Hey, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to whatever that is. I will definitely read it. I can't wait. That's it's going to be awesome. Jay, I know that it's opening day. You got to go stretch and get the uniform on and stuff and all that. So thanks for getting up early. I know getting up early is hard for you, so also appreciate that one. So it's great to see you on this early morning. Anything else you'd want to kind of add to the pile of cool stuff as we kind of wrap this discussion on inside game, mental game?
No, just thanks for having me. This has been a fun conversation. Yeah, the questions you ask, it's interesting. If I was listening to this, I'd be thinking how I would answer some of the questions. So hopefully for your audience, it's less what I said and more thinking how they might answer the questions for themselves, because those are really impactful.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks, Jay. Really appreciate the time and look forward to chatting soon.
Sounds good, Paul.
Thanks. All right, folks, there you go. That's a wrap. Fantastic conversation with Jay Hennessey. Jay's like the real deal. You get a chance to spend any time around Jay and you'll understand a couple things. One, he's really serious about the things that he's serious about, but he also has a ton of fun. And that's what I really enjoy about Jay. I love to have Jay on the call today, talk about all things inner game relating to things like U.S. Navy SEALs, Cleveland Guardians, and so forth, leadership and teamwork as well, which is a big part of Jay's world. Love the story about Jay at Buds and at Hell Week starts and the guy draws the line on the whiteboard and he's like, hey, anyone know what this is? No. And he draws the little speck. Anyone know what this is? No. And he's like, this tiny speck is Hell Week on the line of your life. You can barely see it. It's a tiny little blip. You're going to get through this one way or the other. And I think it's this whole idea of context and perspective as a key to moving through struggle and moving through any challenge. So love that. Great to have you, Jay. Really, really appreciated that you took the time to do this, especially on opening day in Cleveland, Ohio. So just to kind of wrap things up, once again, I'm Paul Monahan, and my mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best. I help my clients to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more. So if you've been enjoying this podcast, the Most Important Game podcast, certainly invite you to reach out and learn more about Paul Monahan. You can do that at paulmonahan.com. That's my website. You can find my book there also, The Most Important Game, Play Better, Struggle Less, and Enjoy More. It's available in paperback and hardcover, ebook, and also Audible or audio. And if you're watching on YouTube and you like the conversation, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe to the channel as well. If you're listening to the podcast, please hit the follow button so that you don't miss an episode. Certainly, we're going to continue to bring you guests like Jay and others that have really interesting stories and pretty interesting backgrounds to talk about as well. And also, if there's topics that you would like to hear us talk about and address, guests you'd like for us to be interviewing, please send us a note. I'm at paul@paulmonahan.com. And special shout out to Kevin Monahan, who produced the show today. Until next time, remember, don't give up. Stay in the game. It is possible, no matter the arena that you are playing in, it's possible to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more.